This is the One Shot Growth Podcast. No fluff, real business. Hosted by Daniel Radabaugh and Derek Boyd, where business, mindset, and real life collide through real conversations, real experiences, and figuring it out together. If you're building, learning, and figuring it out too, you're in the right place.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the One Shot Growth Podcast. I'm Derek Boyd, and I've got my partner Daniel Radabaugh behind the controls on this episode. He's producing, and we want to talk about a couple of things today around kind of mental health and the stigma behind getting support. And I'm here with Patricia Watlington with Rise Consulting. Patricia, you want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you, Derek. I'm Patricia Watlington. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of Rise Counseling and Social Work Services in Big Spring, Texas. I can work with pretty much all people from Texas dealing with some different mental health challenges like depression, anxiety, OCD, PTSD. I use different approaches like CBT, DBT, and accelerated resolution therapy are my main modalities. And then I also provide like clinical supervision and consulting for other MSW students.
We've had many discussions around a lot of these different modalities, especially the accelerated resolution therapy. My mother got involved in that modality and have really been fascinated with some of the work that's gone into that. And that's kind of snowballed into a lot of broad topic discussions around who's actually struggling with these things and what makes it challenging for them to reach out for support. So we just want to have a conversation today around what this kind of looks like, and we hope that this is valuable for you. It's definitely not coming from a place of judgment, just coming from personal experience, professional experience, and a lot of things that we have kind of taken in ourselves and we see across the oil field, the military, both men and women alike, that sometimes just makes it challenging to get out into a space to be open about this kind of thing. And we want to start off with talking about where this stigma actually comes from. I think most of us could agree there's usually a stigma behind mental health and what support looks like. And that makes it very challenging to get past all the pathways and opportunities to get support. So we'll talk a little bit about where this stigma comes from. In your world, Patricia, when somebody walks into your office for the first time, what does that usually look like? And what did it take for them to kind of get to the point where they were open to seeing you?
Yeah, talking about oil field workers, veterans, and things like that, like really kind of like focusing on those type of population and mostly men, right? So, and the stigma for men are just, I think, a little bit harder. So honestly, I see a lot of people come in. This is their last resort. So someone has either finally encouraged them, pushed them, something like that, just to come in. It may be the spouse saying, "Hey, something's changed. This isn't working anymore. I think you need to talk to somebody." Most of the time, they're not walking into my office saying, "Hey, I'm struggling with my mental health and I'd really like to process my emotions." They're coming in, they're wanting answers and solutions. That's what they want. It's more like, "Hey, tell me what's wrong. Tell me why I'm doing this. Tell me how to fix it." And that actually makes a lot of sense whenever you're talking about the environments many of these people are coming from. So they're problem solvers most of the time. If something breaks, you figure out how to fix it. That's the type of population we're talking about today. You open the hood and something's broken, you get the right tool and you figure out what needs to be fixed, you fix it, and then you move on. It's just, people are just not that simple. You can't just open the hood and fixes, right? One of the biggest things I do notice is that functioning as a human is not the same as being okay.
And we've had this conversation before, right? Where, of course, it's helpful for them to actually get to the point where they want to show up. But it's really kind of sad that it takes such a level of extremity to get somebody in when this kind of work can be done before there's major catastrophes or issues going on in someone's life. It's just most people, based on the stigma, they think that this is, especially men traditionally, when you think therapy, you think to the worst detriment of where people could be at, right? I'm getting depressed.
Right.
I have suicidal ideation. I have some really challenging things in my life. It's kind of like you said, that last point of lifeline when this could be a lot easier to unpack and go through without it having to get to that point.
Yeah, that's true. Like when you see like a man, like a typical man, like what we see every day, they're going to work every day, right? They're providing for their family. They're paying all the bills. They're taking care of all these responsibilities. And like from the outside, he's like, I'm fine. And then I think sometimes we measure that, oh, he's okay. Like he's totally okay because he's doing all of these things. He has a checkbox. I'm going to work. Yes. I'm still providing. Yes. I'm getting everything done. Yes. Okay, then I'm fine. But then we start peeling things back. Like we peel back the onion. He's not sleeping well. He's exhausted. Work feels harder than it used to. It didn't get harder. It feels harder than it used to. Maybe he's irritable now. Maybe his relationships are struggling, whether it's his spouse, his friends, his kids, and he's withdrawing. Sometimes people just have negative coping skills like drinking or, withdrawing, things like that. And they just shut everything off with it. So it's not always just one thing. It's usually his capacity started from here and then all of these little things and it just gets smaller and smaller. He's carrying so many things on his shoulders with all the things we just talked about: work, marriage, kids, finances, pressure to provide, everything else that life is throwing at him. It's getting too heavy. And then suddenly what used to be normal that wasn't that big of a deal, you get just like huge reactions. So if he has this much capacity and then he stops sleeping this much and then it just goes little and then his kids are loud and he's like, stop it. Like it's not that the kids are even louder. It's just his capacity and his reactions are bigger. And then people are like, something's wrong. Somebody else notices. So sometimes the thing that finally gets the man through the door doesn't necessarily mean that he recognized how much pain he was in. It's either he or somebody else recognized the consequences of the pain. And that is the biggest distinction right there of why somebody finally comes through the door, is the consequences. So we don't have to be completely falling apart to be caring too much, because all of those things are normal. Like we all, like as humans, as adults, but also, men, it's just, it gets too heavy. So it gets too big. And I think that is whenever it gets too much.
Yeah, and we talk about the culture that kind of where this timeline has kind of unrolled, and both the military, the oil field, what we see a lot out here, everywhere, but even more so in the Permian Basin with a challenging work environment. I think when you look at the previous generations, this kind of work wasn't really prevalent 2-3 generations ago, where therapy work or modality work wasn't even really on the radar. And historically, we've been taught to kind of suppress and bottle up a lot of this stuff, and there wasn't really a whole lot of demonstration on how do you go about unpacking this kind of things. It's always been really rough and tough. Like stop being soft, and you do what you got to do, and that's what being a man is. And you suffer. That's just part of being a man. Is you just need to buckle down and do what you can. And I think we're kind of figuring out that that's not really the best strategy to suppress, right? Because we have a lot of energy and emotions that get trapped in the body. And like you said, it doesn't only impact us specifically, it impacts everybody around us. So I think culturally, we're kind of getting to a point where we're starting to realize that talking about some of these things and actually making an environment where you can look at this stuff and unpack it a little bit is becoming a lot more normal, where historically we just really didn't have a whole lot of guidance in that.
Yeah. I mean, I absolutely agree. I think that kind of like looking at the generations, like you were saying, I don't think there's any specific time in a man's life where they had their grandfather or their father sit down with them and say, well, this is what it has to look like. You have to be tough. You have to bear your feelings. You can't, in order to be a man, like you have to do all of these things. I think maybe for some people, yeah, but for most of the time, these young boys are just watching their dad go to work every day. They're just, oh, no matter what, dad provides. Dad doesn't talk about his feelings, so I can't talk about my feelings. So I think culturally, yeah, that's really important to kind of see what happened in the past doesn't mean it always works. Like there was a lot of struggle in those other generations too. So we have to see, like, we have resources now. We do have the ability to come, like have our brothers, our husbands and our friends go out and actually be able to release some of this, what they need to talk about. And it's therapy is not just talking about your feelings. I think there is like a misconception that I think we're going to talk about here in a little bit, but our culture now is pushing more to like, hey, it's okay to come and release some of this load that you're carrying because you're carrying a lot, and validating that. Like nobody should be able to have to carry this on their own.
Well, and I think a big thing that we'll get into later on in the show, some of the different modalities, but I think as it ties to the stigma, a lot of people just think, especially in oil and gas and men specifically, think that if you're going to go into this space and start to do this work, then that just puts you way over on the other end of the spectrum of a big softy. And a lot of people, a lot of men in general too, are like, I don't have time for that. That's not for me. I don't need to talk about my feelings and things like that. The stigma is so deep that this just looks like talk therapy when there's so many other paths that have developed out there that don't necessarily just go straight to talk therapy. Talk therapy is great and it has its place and it's super valuable, but I think from a stigma standpoint, most people think therapy and they think like straitjacket, right? Or like somebody's crazy or you're in a really bad way, when really the path to unpacking this doesn't always look like just going to that other end of the spectrum. It's there's many different pathways to get there, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. But I think the stigma has just historically been, it's so little talked about and dismissed easily that it makes somebody thinks, well, have you taken any time to see anybody about this or have a kind of a reference point to help you guide through what this work actually looks like? I don't need any of that stuff. Well, that's not for me. That's soft. I mean, we'll use more colorful language usually in the oil field, and I think it's just coming from not really knowing what all is out there and not having a lot of explanations on, okay, therapy doesn't just mean that you have to go sit somewhere and they encourage you to cry if you need to. Like that's not really that's not just the gist behind this work, right?
That's so true. I mean, I do see men in my practice. And a lot of the times I will have a man come in and, he's like, well, I can talk to my buddies about this and we can talk and shoot the shit for hours and I don't feel any better afterwards. It's like, but then they come to therapy and they're like, it's just different because we do different things. We have different skills and we teach people different skills on how you can reframe thoughts. It's one thing talking to a friend, like you can vent and you can do the things and they're going to be on your side no matter what. But whenever you're fighting yourself in your own brain, and you're talking like really negatively to yourself, sometimes we just need to figure out what the skills are to reframe that so we can feel better. And that's what therapy does.
What do you see in these rooms for the people who actually decide to show up and do this work? Or, I'm sure some of it takes a little bit of time, obviously, from going from nothing to something to regular practice. But what are the benefits and the changes that you've seen from starting point to transformation in doing this sort of work?
Yeah. So I think from the very beginning, like I said a bit ago, it's like they come in almost like forced and they come in thinking, oh, my wife is making me come and I don't need to do this. This is silly. What is talking about it gonna do, kind of thing. And by the end of it all, if they, complete their full, like we call it treatment plans, and then we set goals and all the things, but like at the end of it all, when they are finished, I think the biggest thing I see is just like, oh my gosh, this is who I'm supposed to be. Like finding that self-worth again, finding out that they can do something. And even though they might have been afraid to come, they might have, either felt weird about it, that they gave themselves a chance and they were able to come out of it just even a little bit better than they came in with it.
Yeah, I know in my personal experience, starting to get into that space and do some work around it, it was a challenging transition because I had not had any guidance or support in there. So the first question usually is, okay, what does that support look like for you? And when you haven't done any of it, you don't really have a reference point. It's like, I don't know because I'm so used to internalizing this and suppressing it. And I don't take this to anybody else because they don't really need to hear about my struggles and all that. It's easier for me to isolate and keep to myself. And then when you finally start to get to where you unpack it, for me, I had to give it a chance, right? Because it's not going to be
Hmm.
something that I'm just walk through the door and you're just like, oh, wow, overnight, everything's great. And let me just flow all this stuff and tell you everything you need to know about what's going on. It's an uncomfortable spot to be in, to even just have the container space for yourself to be supported by somebody when you're not used to getting that support. Few people are talking about this kind of stuff in the workplace. Most people at the house are either trying to regroup from their lives or, handle their kids or their business or all their other things, right? So it's not something that is, is a, we're not all experts in this space at all. And that's why people like you exist, right? To help us look at this outside of the box. But it does take time. And it's not something that for me was just something that was going to happen overnight and be quick. It's an ongoing part of growth that doesn't ever end, because even if you go through one thing or another, there's always going to be something to come back to, that this particular space to work inside of is a necessary space to be in that no other space is going to be able to give to you. So I think you got to see it through. First step is obviously getting there, right? Getting past the stigma and taking a chance on it. And then there's this kind of unfolding that has to happen, for me anyway, that I had to give it a chance to kind of allow it to do what it needed to do when I was just so completely unfamiliar with what that was supposed to look like. And the first couple of engagements were kind of just spent like wrapping my head around it, feeling more comfortable, knowing and creating that trust in a space that it was okay for me to talk about this kind of stuff. And then once that suppression kind of releases, then there's all kinds of work to do on so many different levels, personally, professionally, human performance. It's really crazy the amount of things that you could
Yeah.
work on.
I think you're so right, Derek. I think like for men, like I said earlier, is like most men, they have a problem, they need a solution, and they come in with this like, okay, here I am, I'm angry, tell me how to fix it. And man, would it be cool if we had a magic wand? Wouldn't it be cool if we just like said, okay, you're fixed kind of thing and walk out the door? But it is the work. It is from the very beginning. Yes, like breaking through that stigma, getting up the courage to come in for your very first time, sitting with the discomfort. Like that is something that I think our society does not do well enough. We have had to kind of force ourselves to, we have to be comfortable all the time. And that's just not true. Like sitting with it and then like taking the skills and the tools that we work on in therapy in our 1 hour a week most of the time, and then taking it with you home and then noticing it and implementing it in your everyday life when you are at work, when you are at home, whenever the kids are running around and your wife is like yelling at you, or whatever the situation is. It's like that's the real work. We only sit together just a little bit, and then allowed to be vulnerable if you want to. We talk about all the things that has happened in that week, and then here's the things that you need to do going home. But then it's up to you. Like here's the tools. You got to go do it. And sometimes it could take a month, but most of the time, by the time these men are coming into to the office, it's been years, and it's going to take some time. Just like any skill that you want to be good at is going to take time to develop. Your negative thoughts took a lot of time to develop, so it will take time to also implement and be good at what you need to tell yourself.
Yeah, I mean, you think about how we look at ourselves in a career standpoint, right? We've been in something for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and the daily flows pretty seamlessly the longer that you've been in a kind of role or a niche, right? And your habits and your experience, usually it's a kind of a casual day when you're on the top side of wisdom and experience. And when you go from never having navigated this space all through childhood, even into adulthood and midlife or even past that point, this is usually not something that most people have a lot of experience in, right? So you can't expect it to be that easy that it's just you just walk in and you've got it conquered and you're an expert on the other side of it very quickly. And it's just like you said, it's like every habit, it takes consistency to get better at it. And without that consistency, you can't get the same results as if you don't. And I've talked to a lot of people that they've probably had a misalignment with their first attempt or two in who they were trying to get to help them, and they just dismissed it right away as it didn't work out for me. I'm not ever doing that again. It's pointless. It doesn't work for me. And it's like, okay, well, I get it, but the first week you try to go to the gym to overhaul your health, it's not going to work overnight. So you just quit the gym and never go back because you had a bad experience. Maybe you went to the wrong gym. Maybe you weren't in the right workout program. Maybe your diet wasn't right. There's so many things, right, that have an impact on how that outcome plays out. But you really can't just give up on it because it didn't work through this kind of framing lens or personality. And I think a lot of guys do struggle with personality and getting that right support because they're looking for something that's relatable, right? In the space of
Hmm.
understanding, like, how are you going to be able to help me understand this when you might not necessarily have walked my path or been through there? And I want you to kind of talk about your experience around this with your family members that are veterans, because you fielded this on many different areas with your family and your partner and your kids, even in the veteran space and the oil and gas space, and kind of give us some insights around that and how you've seen that play out.
Yeah, yeah. So, like Derek said, I do have some personal experience. So we were laughing at one time because I have my dad is a Navy vet, my brother is a Marine vet, and my husband's an Army vet. So imagine them coming together for Thanksgiving. Like it's pretty funny, but just kind of like seeing those experiences and getting to watch from a personal standpoint, and then also like working with men, in the clinical role. So when it comes to like, hey, this doesn't work for me, like as a veteran, that's really relatable because a lot of time, especially when you first come out of the military, they're like, oh no, we are tough. We are not going to do this. Like, if I say anything, that means I'm going to be labeled or, whatever the case may be. I mean, it took me several years to get my husband to go to the VA. And like, okay, so can't do those things. I can't help you because I'm your wife. Like that's not appropriate. But the VA can help you. And like getting him to go past that stigma to just go to the VA for the first time was like it was an act of Congress. So yeah, but they do. It takes a little bit. And if it didn't work the first time, they're like, nope, never going to go back. Like it doesn't work for me. They gave me the runaround. And I don't know. I'm sure you know the VA system. It's not 100% all the time, like on point, just depending. So it's like if they go in and they have a bad experience, they're just like, nope, they can't. They don't understand. I'm going to leave, kind of thing.
Yeah, we network with quite a few people here around Midland and Odessa, and some friends of ours that work up at the college in the veterans program up there, and they have done a really great job of creating a space where we meet monthly, and that is what they preach all the time because there's guys who've come in to try to get their disability ratings enhanced or take another look at what they need to have for their ratings and stuff like that. And sometimes it may take 5 or 6 times. It may take 6 months. It may take a couple of years. And so many people have just quit when they got declined or, it didn't work out, like you said, the first time or two. And there's, that's definitely not a reason to give up on it, even though it's very frustrating. It's very aggravating, and it's not always the easiest thing to stick with. I think we're all apt to get frustrated with customer service when it doesn't go the way that we would like for it to go. And I think it's enhanced for people that are veterans because usually we're so tactically sharp, right? And our expectation is when we're tasked to do something, we get it done. And we do it the right way. There's a lot of pressure, and that goes for oil and gas too. Kind of the tip of the spear of having to stay constantly engaged in a sense of reaction that is accurate, it's intelligent, you just don't mess around with it. So when you take that and have that expectation outside of those spaces, it can get challenging to deal with realities that and people and places and organizations that don't move at that same tempo, or they're not thinking that way, right?
Right. And like kind of like getting into their shoes. Like sometimes when you go into a clinic for the first time, these people have been working here day in and day out. They see hundreds of veterans a year. And then you are in your own space, you're walking into that door, sometimes for the first time. And if like they're just like nonchalant because this is their everyday, you might feel like, oh, this isn't gonna work for me, and or maybe you need more structure because you are coming from the military. Like maybe you have to wake up and you've got to make your bed kind of structure. Like this is what I do from 8 to 9. This is what I do from 10 to 11, all the things. And maybe it's just like so crazy and hectic in the system, that it feels like too overwhelming. It's like, nope, I don't want to do that. But maybe it just wasn't the right timing. Maybe it wasn't the right modality. Maybe it wasn't sitting there and talking just didn't feel helpful to you at the time. Maybe it wasn't the right clinic or therapist that you went in and saw. So therapy not working and therapy not working at the time that you go in is not the same thing. It's a lot about timing.
Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit about what it's actually costing us to not participate in doing this kind of work. And there's so many different aspects of human performance that is massively impacted by this. And what's wild to me is that I think mental health is probably the primary driver for how we show up in the world. And ironically, it's probably the least engaged area of practice. You've got a human behind a role that steps into an obligation every day, whether that's a personal side as a provider, as a husband, a father, a brother, a son, whatever. And you've also got your work roles, right? But behind your SOPs and your protocols and your bill structure and your finances and all that fun stuff, you're a human being first. And your mental health is just as vitally important as your physical health. And yet it's so little talked about to look at that and do just a little bit of work behind it to make sure that we're in an optimal place just to function before we assume these identities and these roles and lead off into all these areas of responsibility that we take on and do that kind of work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think too, like when we're talking about men like first coming in that door, you have to think about what it means for them to go in to the door for the first time. What it means to like finally build up the courage. Like there's almost like a fear of failure. It's like if I do this, that equals that I failed. And we really have to explore that. And I know we're going to talk about that more, but just like we have to redefine what failure is because taking care of yourself does not equal failure. And I think if we can really help our veterans and our oilfield workers and, even ourselves, like realize like if you are so overwhelmed that your people are noticing and you're noticing that you're struggling, that does not mean that you're failing. That just means that you need support.
100%. So what do you see normally when somebody's been carrying something for a really long time and they finally do get that courage to come in and to start doing that work? What changes, where does it show up for them to switch from no support to being supported? How does it impact them on a daily basis and how many different areas?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of different areas. First, like just kind of like figuring out like we need to talk to men that asking for help does not mean looking weak. It's just part of it, right? What I hear underneath is most likely I should be able to handle this. That shoulda, like that word shoulda. I would say, and I heard this from somewhere before. Don't should on yourself. It's messy, right? So the word should is important though, because for a lot of men, they have a very clear idea of what their job is. Like it doesn't mean their actual job going to work every day in the oil field. So I'm supposed to provide. I should provide. I'm supposed to protect my family. I'm supposed to fix all of these things. I'm supposed to be dependable because like I'm the man, you know. It's like, again, we don't like, nobody sat us down one day and their fathers told them, hey, this is what you're supposed to do, but it just comes like naturally. You know, if I blow up, everybody's going to look at me. So I'm supposed to stay calm when things go wrong because people depend on me. And if I say I can't handle this, what does that mean about me? And if I can't do my job, all of those things just listed, does that mean I'm failing? So I want to be like really like distinctful is like, just because I don't, just because you do all of those things, it does not mean that you're bad, right? If you do like compartmentalize, and if you do like, I'm tough, I can do all of the things, those things are good things. Being a good provider is a good thing. Being dependable is a good thing. Being able to push through hard situations is a really valuable thing whenever you're in oil field work, when you're in the military and high pressure jobs. Like sometimes you have to be able to perform under pressure, and it may be exactly what you need to do. So it's not that those things are bad, because those are very valuable things. The question is really, when does a strength stop serving you? So being so independent is a strength. Absolutely. You can handle it by yourself. That's a strength. But it doesn't mean that you're not going to be drowning if you use it in the wrong situation. Being able to compartmentalize is useful, right? But then when you can't turn it off and walk through the door at home, you know, and whenever you're always compartmentalizing, that can be kind of damaging. You know, being able to push through discomfort, we talked about like being uncomfortable, is valuable. Being able to push through it, until pushing is the only way you know how to cope. And then it does it gets kind of hard, because it's like not everything has to be pushed down so far. So I think that's where the fear of failure can really trap somebody. You know, it's like we are allowed we are allowed to give ourselves permission to be human. And that is something that I try to teach people. You know, you're allowed to be vulnerable. You're allowed to do all of those things that you need to do to provide for your family. Yes, that's great. But you also are allowed to let some of it go and let people support you too.
Yeah, and all of those things kind of tie in hand with what it actually costs you when you don't do that. You've got, for me personally, chronic stress was happening at a level that I couldn't really understand and comprehend why so many things simultaneously were going kind of off the rails. When your nervous system is so stressed out, it impacts your sleep, it impacts your decision making quality, and you're still going through the motions on paper of, this is what it takes for me to do these roles or these jobs or whatever I need to do to fulfill my responsibility. But your body is telling you something else, and you start having trouble keeping up with, obviously, once your sleep is impacted, that affects everything. You get a lot more irritable. It's a huge challenge for military and oil and gas workers, because we don't always have the greatest schedules. Sometimes we're working rotation work, sometimes we're working shift work. Sometimes we don't get to go home when we thought we were going to get to go home, and we work past our 12-hour hitch, or we work over past our 2 or 3 weeks on, and or whatever the split may be. Sometimes we don't get a rotation at all, and we just have to work until the work's done, and then don't really get a chance to regroup. So it's been really interesting for me to walk down that path and to start to kind of be aware of how big of an impact this is, to not do that work and just keep suppressing. Because even though mentally I may think I've got this under control, my body is literally pushing me to the point where it's breaking down internally when I'm not addressing these issues, right? And the relationship cost, I think, too, is what a lot of people struggle with. It's already a struggle to put yourself in a position to unpack this for yourself and try to navigate that journey for yourself, much less take into consideration, well, how is that impacting the people that you're loved and surrounded by the most? We're not looking at ourselves through that lens. It makes it equally challenging to look at somebody else's perspective of what we're putting them through by not doing this kind of work. And it's not to judge or shame anybody for not doing that work. It's just, I think it's really challenging to realize beyond ourselves when we're already habitually not looking internally, to be considerate of what other people around us are actually seeing and experiencing when they deal with us out in the world in the different lanes of doing this work or not, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it does show up. Like you said, poor first it comes with like the poor quality sleep. That's where we really start seeing it, and then think about like whenever you only get a few hours of sleep a night, which I think is a lot of people under high stress, everything else suffers from there. And then if they're just not sleeping, right? Maybe you're not doing everything else. Like you're not able to have like a quality conversation with your partner, your kids, your spouse, your coworkers. Maybe you're doing more like short-term negative coping skills because just to kind of push through. Like maybe like such as like drinking, it quiets your brain for a little bit. It helps you kind of calm down. So I like that you mentioned, the sleep because it does oftentimes start there. And then everything else follows suit. And then it just kind of like builds on from there. So yeah, poor quality sleep affects the way you kind of just like move throughout your relationships with everybody.
Yeah, that's a it's an interesting and kind of a cautious topic out here to talk about the vices and the habits because we really have a kind of a playground, if to call it that, of opportunities that I think it's easy to latch on to use as a vice to escape from the reality, right? And you've been working long and hard at your nervous system is stressed out, your body's tired, your mind is spent, and maybe the situation at home is not the best, and maybe there's not a lot of direction or understanding at that moment on how to navigate that. The easiest thing to do for a lot of us is just push away from it and find ourselves in environments where we can find something that just makes us not have to deal with that reality for a brief moment, whether that's a TV show or vices with drugs and alcohol and things like that. Everybody has their preferences on what they enjoy casually. I think where the challenge is when that gets to be a coping mechanism that becomes a pattern response to where that's the sole driving kind of mechanism that's used to cope with not having to think and deal with this stuff. And like we're talking about, if you're suppressing all this stuff and you're not going into a space to actually get it out and work through it, then a lot of things just become kind of a tool to use in place of that work to just distance yourself from having to think about it, actually sit with that reality, like you said.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, short-term relief, like with all these vices, whether it's drugs or alcohol, like you said, or maybe like videos, like gaming, all those short-term relief can turn into a long-term cost. And that's kind of what we're talking about today, too, is this the cost of, not seeking help or support. And one of the biggest things I see whenever, you do have all of these short-term reliefs you kind of start struggling, right? And then if you do start struggling, you don't want nobody to notice that you're struggling. So you have this wall. We call this like, if you have a wall and you don't want nobody else to notice, so that wall is going to be thick and it's going to be strong and it's going to be really hard to get past that. So, and that in itself is its own little vice. That's withdrawal. That's like, I don't want anybody to notice that I can't handle it because if you can't handle it, equals I'm a failure at my job.
Yeah, and Daniel and I talk about this in some of our presentations that we give too. It's not always easy to be upfront about it inside of a workplace because the demand is so high for you to operationally excel. There are labels sometimes that come out of coming forward and saying some of these things and bringing them into the light, and it's not always the easiest place to try to come to a superior or someone in the leadership and say, man, I'm really struggling with this and I don't really know the best way to handle it. Can you help me? And the big challenge is because historically there's not a lot of this conversation happening or there's not a lot of demonstration on how to navigate it. They don't know how to help you either. So then it just becomes like, well, everything's usually about the money, right? And keeping the operation going. So it's like, well, I don't know, man. Like, if you can't do this or you're having trouble with this, I guess I just need to find somebody who can. And so people get to a point where even many times they're screaming, desperate for help, and they've tried to make that audible. And just the simple fact that so many people around them don't know how to navigate that either, they just genuinely don't know how to help them. And when that kind of gets into a rejection mode or kind of being shamed for that, then of course you're just going to suppress it even more, and you're going to lock it down and say, well, it's obviously not my place to talk about this in front of my partner because I get ridiculed for this or whatever, or it's not my place to bring it up at work because I may get replaced and lose my job over it if I bring this up. And it's challenging because every leadership team, I think, has good intentions on wanting to know more about how to do it, but it's not just going to come from checking the box that you have an EAP program that covers all this, and you just punt that decision to them, and hopefully they can make the connection with the people and it all works out. The management team itself, every human that is in a role, in a position, is has got to be looking at this kind of work in some capacity to be able to field those kinds of questions and even seeing the responses, the patterns, and having the awareness to say, I'm noticing that my person's not doing so well right now. And if you don't, then all you can really do is just kind of nothing really to be able to help them out, right? Like, they're going to come to you, or they're going to be operating in their own little world in their space. If you can't see it because you haven't done that work yourself, how are you ever going to be able to guide someone through that process to at least get them connected to what that support should look like to help them out? And it's, I don't, I'm very careful. We get passionate about this topic. I don't think it's the wrong intentions, because a lot of companies have put a lot of money and a lot of effort into trying to find better ways to make this more beneficial. But I still think it comes down to, okay, well, how many people on the actual team have actually done this kind of work to be able to demonstrate and go first and to lead the way and say, well, I may not have it all figured out, but I at least have done enough of this exploration on my own path that outside of these programs and all these things that are great and we hope that you utilize just on a regular day-to-day basis, I'm able to help steer you and connect you to support that can help you, because I've done some sort of similar work myself to be able to understand it. And I think that's a big part of what we have to overcome in these spaces with the stigmas. Is it's not just a referral and you're out of the picture. It's doing that work yourself so that you can then turn around and be able to help people that need that support going through it.
That is absolutely right. And you know what? I couldn't imagine, not having that support. And my field is going to be like so much more different because we can go and we can get support from each other. But like, to go to your superior and say, hey, I'm struggling, and then to be rejected is very lonely. That's extremely lonely. So yeah, we do have to start from the top. And I think when you were talking, it came to me, it's like, I think when people say, oh, we have an EAP, go over there, I think they're scared. I think they're just like, oh my gosh, how do I handle this? Because if they've never gone through before, which is pretty rare, maybe they just haven't told anybody, but they're scared. So they say, okay, I can't do anything about this. And then they like kind of have an automatic judgment. We do have a stigma of mental health. Like, it is, in this high, like, I want to say macho, but not really. I mean, just like, I can't show you what's underneath. I can't peel that layer because I have to be all of these things for all of these people as a supervisor. It's like, that's scary to have to kind of just realize that mental health exists in the people around you, including yourself. So if we take a step back and really look at it, like, you're just a human. If you went in to your boss and said, hey, I have to go to the cardiologist because I'm having like trouble with heart, like chest pain and stuff, you're like, oh my gosh, how scary. Like, let me know how it goes. Like, I've got a really good cardiologist friend, let me give you their number. And then the next week you're like, hey, how'd your appointment go? It's so funny how support can look so different for physical health. It's not that scary, right? But when it comes to mental health, we don't want to talk about feelings. Yeah, that's not something we want to do. Like, go away, go to our EAP. We don't know anything about that kind of thing, because then you risk being vulnerable, and that's a really hard place to be for a man in that, and especially in that field, in that position. So if we just like take it back, like, no, mental health is just a human thing. We all have mental health, just like we have physical health. And if we can support that person, you don't have to, as a supervisor or a coworker or whatever, you don't have to solve the problem for them. Sometimes just sitting in the space with them is all they need. And then get the referral to the person that can do the treatment, like the cardiologist for the for the heart. It's just when they have support at getting the resources that they need, they will in turn come back to work as a better person. Just like if they go and see the heart doctor and get on medication, they will come back and be a better physically apt person to do their job because they have their heart under control. But if they're sitting there struggling and just holding it down in fear of, anybody finding out, it will get worse. Like mental health, it will compound. Stress will compound. It just like it stacks and stacks and stacks. So really preventative is to just support them anyway. And just like make it a normal cultural thing. Like, hey, like it's cool that you're getting help. I mean, even if you don't want to hear it, like I don't want to hear it from you, but I'm glad that you're getting help. That's fine too. Just like, but be supportive of them.
Yeah, we were just talking about this the other day with a group that we were visiting with, and it came up. It was like I would rather piss somebody off by checking on them and asking them how they're doing, and them get offended by me asking than me not ask, and it goes unchecked, and they get to a place where they can't get out of it by themselves, right? I can deal with you being upset with me all day long. I'm still going to ask you how are you doing, and I'm still going to make sure you're doing okay, because a lot of times people need that support and they never get it, and that's when things fall apart. It's so wild to me that it is so second nature for us to just be like, oh, whoa. You tell anybody like, man, I'm having some issues with my major organs, or I've got to go in and have this looked at, and everybody's immediately like, oh, absolutely. Take all the time you need. This is a serious deal. Like, there's no question, right? But then when you look at it from a mental health lens, like, why isn't this as normal as getting in rotation to get your teeth cleaned or to get your blood pressure checked? And the crazy part about it is it could be the biggest driver that impacts those areas anyway, right? So the struggles with your heart and your brain and your sleep and all these things are directly impacted by your mental health. So the longer that area goes unchecked is the more likely you're going to have these visits to the physical side anyway, because you're not putting that time and attention into what that looks like. So yeah, I agree 100%. We want to get rid of the stigma and stop talking about this like it's only a worst case use situation, because it's a basic part of being a human being regardless, and it's not taken advantage of and utilized anywhere near as much as it should be. Let's talk a little bit about what this support can actually look like, because we talked earlier in the show about this looking like a lot of different things. Most people imagine therapy as kind of an open-ended, indefinite kind of center space talking about feelings, and that's just one modality. It's not the whole picture. There's a whole range of different pathways and modalities that can help. So let's talk about some of those with things like EMDR, accelerated resolution therapy, somatic work. Kind of walk us through the different approaches and how you see that just being how it works in conjunction with talk therapy, and how that pathway is different for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I like how you said each pathway is not for everybody, right? Because it's not a one size fits all. So I don't want somebody like listening to this show to think that therapy is just one thing specific, because it's definitely not. There is a lot of different approaches. And there's a lot of different therapists in this area that specialize in different things. Like when you go to like a bigger city, I'm in Big Spring, so we have our therapists here usually like have multiple modalities that we have. But like when you're in a bigger city, you can like have like something that you specialize in, one thing. So for my own work, I do cognitive behavioral therapy, which is basically just looking at how your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are connected, and then identify like patterns, so that way that may not be helping you anymore. So is it hurtful for you or is it helpful for you? So that's just one of the modalities. There's also something where situations might warrant accelerated resolution therapy, which I think you talked about earlier in the show. And it's just dealing with experiences or memories that are still creating distress. So that's like when we go into like our fight or flight, our natural body's response to stress. We have like a trauma, or we have like, and a trauma could be look like something different for everybody. So we process that in our bodies, and sometimes they kind of get stuck and they do cause us distress. So when we have like these active, it takes us right back. It takes us right back to that. So accelerated resolution therapy helps us deal with those memories in a way that we can reprocess through our bodies and kind of move that out, which again, like we can do somatic work and body based work. It's pretty similar because sometimes experiencing stress and survival responses, we do have those very physically. So, like our person that is going to see the cardiologist, it's like sometimes it just didn't start there. It's like sometimes you're so anxious that you have like panic attacks that feel like a heart attack. That's very physical manifestation of mental health. And it goes a lot more beyond that. Our mental health is connected to our physical health. Our physical health is connected to our mental health. Just think about somebody who's depressed. They can't get out of bed. They're going to be down. They're not going to have enough exercise, which turns into, a host of other issues there. Somebody who's dealing with different traumatic experiences may start smoking, right? For instance, and then look what that does to your physical. That is going to affect your lungs physically. So somatic work does help like connect all of those things, like the body based kind of work. And sometimes I think dealing with one individual isn't always just one piece of the pie. Sometimes you have to bring in like a couple, for instance. Like let's say your communication with each other is just not on par, and then you have to bring in the other person so you can figure out what the actual problem is. Couples work is also really important, like piece of the puzzle here. And then whenever you have two people together, you can learn how to communicate, and you can both learn different skills and stuff, and then you can bring that home and implement it in real life, and then things will just work better that way. There's a ton of different modalities out there. There's a ton of different things out there that you can do. Person-centered I like to do person-centered too sometimes whenever somebody just wants to come in and just talk about their week. Like we can bring in other skills and other modalities, but sometimes you just want to be validated. You just want to come in and gripe and feel better, and have a little bit of reframing here and there. So I think you're right. There's not a one size fits all. There's not something for everybody. And my job is to not make you fit to therapy. My job is to figure out what kind of support fits you. So if my modality doesn't work for what you are needing, I will help you find the person that does work. Like, and every therapist is not going to be right for you. We talked about earlier, like therapy doesn't work for me because the first time I walked in, this is what happened. Well, maybe that just wasn't the right therapist. That's okay, because personalities matter, communication styles matter. All of those things are like go into our modality, the way we communicate with our clients. So I think that is answering your question, like the one size doesn't fit all kind of thing. But yeah, we can definitely help find the right therapist for you if needed.
What was really important for me to realize once I started to explore the space and I did start to see the different modalities and approaches and what they actually target and how they actually help, it wasn't just beneficial from that worst case scenario standpoint. A lot of this from an optimization standpoint has benefited me just from being able to go into that space and do that work before anything severe or crazy was happening. I still learned so much from it. And I think, like, talking back to the stigma and generally people feeling like therapy is a last resort for nothing else is working, when it's quite the opposite. When you can understand the different pathways and the different modalities and what the actual focus is of that work, you can benefit in that from things like human optimization. You can do this work to help you with your relationships at home, like you said, and communicating better. It doesn't always have to be a last case fire alarm, pull here when you're out of options, right? Like the stigma behind therapy in general is this is where you go when you're out of control and you have nowhere else to turn. I think some of the top people out there that have understood optimization they treat this on the front side as something that they're proactive with because they understand the impact that the mental has on the physical. And this is just another part of the equation. And it's not, like I said, it's not just one modality. You may find doing that work to be beneficial for a while, and then you might have kind of done some good work there, and it's time to look at it from a different approach or a different lens. And there's nothing wrong with that. Maybe you take a break for a while and you're good, and you come back, and maybe you, for me, kind of interchanging the different modalities is helping. Right? Sometimes we'll do talk therapy. Sometimes we'll do accelerated resolution therapy. Sometimes we'll do some breath work or there's lots of other things out there that can help, but it's kind of shifting that awareness and that mindset out of this is a last ditch effort to save me from catastrophe to looking at it as this is a good way for me to do work on myself that's beneficial, just like going to the dentist to get my teeth cleaned is beneficial, just like going for a regular checkup is beneficial, and just starting to treat it that way. We all have so many options that we're quick to jump into with different gyms and different types of workouts that we like to go to. And some of us run, and some of us CrossFit, and some of us lift heavy. And some of us bounce around between some of those, and we do a little bit for a while, then we kind of switch it up. They're all beneficial, right? Like if you're going into fitness, anything, walking is better than not doing anything at all. And I think that's where our work is. We're raising awareness about this. It's to demystify what all these approaches actually accomplish and how they're doing this work, because it's not just that one-stop shop. There's so many different ways, and like you said, different providers that offer this. And sometimes we don't always match with the provider that we line up with the first time. And there may be 3 or 4 other people out there that we could get benefit from. And I think it's tough. I think a lot of people struggle with, they want to align with someone who can kind of be on their perspective bandwidth and it not feel like criticism, right? Because it's a very challenging area to navigate, where you want to build trust there to be able to kind of unpack these things about the self. But I think a lot of people would also agree that sometimes having alternate perspectives that differ from yourself is highly beneficial as well. So yes, it's important to kind of get in that space with somebody who tracks along with that and makes you feel like you can be trusted and unpack that stuff. But it's also equally important, I think, to put yourself in spaces where they might not see things the same way you are, and they may have a different perspective than you do, and it might not feel completely comfortable, but that's part of doing that work to challenge yourself beyond what you're comfortable with. It's not comfortable work, like you said, for us to sit with this in the space long enough to look at the self and unpack everything from generational environments and raisings, where we came from, what we were brought up with, those kinds of environments, how that impacted us growing up and turning into adults, and how that has, transpired beyond that into our patterns and our habits and things like that. It's not always going to be this amazing just transition of unlocking, right? Like there's a lot of deep work, there's a lot of uncomfortable things that have to happen. But I think if we get on the front side of being proactive about it and explore all the paths, don't just try one, like try the different things and actually look to understand what each modality actually accomplishes and what it's targeting, and give yourself the freedom to try it through a couple of different perspective lenses too.
I think that's a really good point about the trust, because if you want to find the right modality, you have to kind of get to know the person first. So rapport is always number one. Like if we're going to work together, we're going to really need to trust each other. Especially if you're already uncomfortable coming to therapy, I'm not going to immediately just dig in and say, hey, what's the deepest parts of your life? And let's decide what we're going to do with you in the first 5 minutes of therapy. We're going to say, hey, let's get to know each other first. If we get to know each other, things are going to get far, or they have the potential of going far. So the first few sessions might just be figuring out who you are, what brought you here, even if it was forced, What do you think isn't working in your life? And what do you want to be different? So what things have you already tried before? Maybe you've already tried therapy before. So we can kind of like figure out like what what your baseline is, and what you are ready to work on. Because if you're not ready to work on something, it's just not going to work. And if you don't trust me as your therapist in an extremely vulnerable space, then it's just not going to go very far. So that's where we start. We start with rapport. We start with maybe some education about like how our bodies respond to stress, that it's not wrong to respond to stress. Like it is literally our natural survival responses that are designed to protect us. We also have to have education of like, when is it that we're living in survival mode? When it's appropriate, like if you're being chased by somebody, yeah, we need to run, But sometimes we are in that high stress situation when we shouldn't be. So kind of like distinguishing that, and that's the education part of it. So, but who's going to listen if you don't have that trust? So I think helping them connect some of those dots between what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and how they're responding, which is kind of that CBT, but they're not going to do that if they don't trust me. So we don't have to just keep talking about your feelings. We don't have to challenge the feelings. Feelings are valid. The thoughts sometimes are not. Sometimes the thoughts are lying to us. So the feelings, if you're angry, you're angry. If you're scared of coming here, then you're scared. If you feel like you're feeling, then that's what you're feeling. That's what you're feeling. We have to challenge the thoughts, of course, and we have to start connecting those things. Is that thought true? Is it helpful? Is there another way to look at this thought? Because if you can look at it a different way and like just reframe that thought, the feeling of failure will be different. We have to redefine the word failure in this situation, at least.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. Well, as we get ready to kind of close this out, we've talked about a lot of good points here, and I think most people would agree that the difference between not doing this work and doing this work, there's a lot of gain that comes out of doing this work, whether that's clearer decisions, better relationships, more bandwidth to be able to operate inside of the responsibilities that you carry. What do you see? I mean, you mentioned before that a lot of people who get to the other side of doing this work kind of get back to a sense of themselves. Do you have anything else to add to that from just kind of a collective experience standpoint on the benefits that come out of the other side of doing this work?
Yeah, I think the biggest things I see is self-awareness, and sometimes those changes that they notice aren't going to be huge dramatic things. So it might be like, man, I'm sleeping better. My wife and I are not fighting as much. I'm not getting pissed off as much as I used to be. You know, Maybe I caught myself before I reacted. Maybe I did stop the thought. Self-awareness is one of like the most useful skills that we have to start feeling like yourself again, because it doesn't mean that you're not going to have bad days. It doesn't mean you're not going to get stressed again. Work is going to be hard. You're just going to have a bigger capacity for it when you start being aware of it. Because then you can implement the things that you need to do. Like if you're not aware, then you're just going to keep rolling. You're not going to be able to stop it. So being aware, that way you can stop your thoughts and reevaluate. Maybe I need to step outside for a second. Maybe I am overwhelmed. Maybe I need to gather my thoughts for a second. But if you're not aware, you're not going to do those steps. So what changes is how quickly you recognize what's happening inside of you. So maybe before it might have been building and building for months or whatnot. Your sleep is getting worse. You're getting more irritable. All those things. Whereas now, if you notice it, maybe you say, well, I'm not sleeping well. So what can I do about it? What can I do to give myself a break? Maybe I'm starting to isolate again. What can I do to make sure I have a conversation with my friends and my wife? Maybe I'm getting defensive. So maybe I need to check in with my thoughts. If somebody is saying to me, hey, I'm worried about you, does not mean, hey, you can't handle life. It means, hey, they're worried about you. That's what it is, So noticing that, being self-aware, and then everything else just follows suit. You can start implementing positive coping skills and then just getting right back on track.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, one of the biggest things to consider in that whole equation is this doesn't mean that you have failed. to go into this space and to do this work. This is not a disappointment that you have had to come here. Quite the opposite. It's really beneficial for you to gain that self-awareness, because it's so easy for us to just get stuck in the rat race of all the things we have going on and not think about this stuff. And then stuff is happening around us that we aren't aware of, and we don't know has kind of spiraled out of control, or just patterns have came into the picture that we're not quick to realize. So I think that's one of the most important things that if anybody could take away something from this episode, is going into this space and doing this work is not associated with failure, and it's not always a worst case last ditch effort to be a part of. There's tremendous benefit from navigating this space in all the different pathways that it looks like, regardless of where you sit, whether you are thinking you're doing really well in life and you got this game figured out, or you're just, as lost as the rest of us and just trying to get by and figure this all out. There's huge benefit in going into this space and looking at this through many different options and modalities with many different providers all around the area that can bring tremendous value to doing this kind of work. So really appreciate you coming on and talking with us about this. This is a big passion point for us to get this out in the open and start having these conversations, being more vulnerable about it, sharing our experiences with others and how that work has looked like for us, because I think somebody has to go first in talking about it, usually, to be a driver to make this not be so stigmatized. So tell the audience, how can they get a hold of you if they would like to connect with you or follow along with your content? I know you're on LinkedIn and socials, and kind of give them a quick plug on how they can reach you if they want to visit with you about this stuff.
Yeah, so my website, Rise Counseling Social Work, so it's www.risecsws.com. And then you can also go to my socials from my website.
It's always a pleasure to have these conversations with you. We could talk for days and days about this stuff, right? And talking about our experiences in oil and gas and military veterans, and specifically the Permian Basin and abroad, even past the Permian, right? This is stuff that people are going through every day, and we never have a shortage of things to discuss about this. So I'm quite sure we'll have another episode in the future where we'll get to unpack some of this stuff again. But we really appreciate you being a part of this with us, and whatever we can do to help you guys out, we're always here for the cause. And guys, appreciate you being a part of this episode. If this resonated with you, please share it. Check us out on our LinkedIn, our website at oneshotgrowth.com. Got a lot of good things going right now, and we're always interested in getting this information to people that find value in it and want to help spread that message. So we appreciate you being here, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here with us on the One Shot Growth Podcast. If this episode hit for you, subscribe, share it with someone who needs it, and keep the conversation going. And if you want to see what we're building, head over to oneshotgrowth.com. We're just getting started. See you on the next one.